Since 1492, when that killer Columbus sailed the ocean blue, our people have been running for their lives, from boot heels, running from guns and knives. Well, maybe if he'd shown the respect of Eric the Red, 3/4 of my people wouldn't have been left for dead. Labeling this a new world is nothing but tragic. For 100,000 years, our people have danced in this magic, and finally we expose these false and oppressive ways, and they think that they can shut us up with Indigenous Peoples Day. Well, maybe if they had the respect of Eric the Red, 3/4 of our people wouldn't be drinking themselves dead. You see, they cloud our awareness with alcohol and pills, then offer a mountain of scrap paper for the Black Hills. Will closed minds ever be able to understand land doesn't belong to people, people belong to land? Thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. We appreciate everyone who's here. We have a presentation we're going to give you, and at the end we'll have some question and answer sessions. So thank you for being here. This is the Indigenous Voices Through Spoken Word, a look at modern day oral history. Before we get started, I would just like to say that we do this in honor of the peoples from the land that Kishwaukee College is currently on. The most prominent tribes were in Illinois were the Illinois, Miami, Winnebago, Fox, and Sauk, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi. And the Illinois Native Americans were comprised of 5 subdivisions, including the Kaskaskias, the Cahokias, the Tamaroas, Peorias, and Michigamis. So we honor them and thank them for coming before us. So one thing that has been very prominent in our American history as we try to put together this puzzle that is the Great American Puzzle, the indigenous side of things has been written out of our textbooks. Here are a couple of examples. This first one is from Bill Bigelow, who wrote the book called Rethinking Columbus Towards a True People's History. For years, I opened my 11th grade US history classes by asking students, what is the name of that guy they say discovered America? A few students might object to the word discover, but they all knew that the fellow I was talking about, Christopher Columbus, several called out in unison. Right, so who did he find when he came here, I asked. Usually a few students would say Indians, but then I asked them to be specific. Which nationality? What are their names? Silence. In more than 30 years of teaching US history and guest teaching in other classes, I've never had a single student say Taínos. So I asked them to think about that fact. How do we explain that? We all know that the name of the man who came here from Europe, but none of us know the name of the people who were here first. And there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them. Why haven't you heard of them? This ignorance is an artifact of historical silencing, rendering invisible the lives and stories of entire peoples. And just to give you an example of how this has occurred, here's an actual excerpt from a history book that's used in the K through 12 system, where they write, the First Nations people agreed to move to different areas that make room for new settlements. This is not what happened at all. They have just erased the Trail of Tears. So when we get into discussions of critical race theory and things of that nature, this is what we're talking about. We're silencing entire peoples just for the benefit of one. So today, hopefully, we're going to get some of the messages out of things that you may not know. For instance, the first actual Thanksgiving did not go down the way that we were told it was. Here's a link. Come on, computer. You did this when I tested you. You can go to this link in the Washington Post. It describes the actual origins of Thanksgiving and how it actually went down, where the tribes assisted the people who were there and then were slaughtered or sold into slavery. And come on, you can do this. There we go. And then here's one that really drives home the point of what happens with written history. Let me get this started. This is a little slow here. Sorry, I'm fumbling through this, but here we go. I will start it over because it starts at me.
This map.
Seen that map?
Ever seen a map that looked like this before? How many of you have ever seen this map?
Seen that map?
Isn't this the map that you use K through 16 in the United States of America? Now, folks, look at this map. According to your social studies teacher, what is the equator?
Right,
an imaginary line where?
Yeah.
Around the center of the earth. Then if this map is correct, then the equator must be here, and Chicago has a tropical climate. Now, folks, this is the map that we use in the schools. Look where the United States is, in the middle of the world, right? Now, here's the USSR, which is no more, of course, Mongolia, China, Africa, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Now, look over here. USSR, Mongolia, China, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Two Indias here. We have two Indias. Did you know that? Now, people, this is a flat-out lie. Look at the size of Greenland and the size of South America. According to your social studies teachers, what were continents? Largest land masses on the face of the earth, right? Now, do you know the continents? Africa, Asia, Australia, Antarctica, Europe, North America, and South America. Did I say Greenland? Well, Greenland isn't a continent, but it's a huge landmass according to this map, right? The map is a flat-out lie, people. If you read the legend on the map, here it says, in fact, South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. Now, look at this map. The equator on this map is down here. All the white countries are larger than they should be, and all the countries of people of color are smaller than they should be. This is a visual image that teaches children a lie. In order to make this map anywhere near accurate, you have to take this over here and put it here like this. Now, well, can somebody hold that? Can you hold that down there, somebody? Are you a somebody?
Sally is a somebody.
Okay,
yeah.
Sally's a somebody. There. Now, take a look at the difference. Does that give you a different visual image of the importance of the United States? People, the way you use things like this, teaching aids like this, are what make you and I racist. We were taught that this is the way the world looks. It's a flat-out lie. Never seen a map that looked like this before.
It's just to give you an idea of what the map would actually look like if we had an honest portrayal of it. Here's a picture that would be more apt to be true to what is actually what the world would look like. And if we taught this to our children, maybe it would change a few things. We could only hope. So in my poem that I read, I had mentioned Eric the Red a couple of times. Why did I do that? Well, recently, NBC just did a report on new evidence, quote unquote, found that proves that Vikings came to North America far before Europeans did. Now, the reason that I had that in my poem is because our oral histories, we've always known this. These oral histories have been handed down for millennia. In our oral histories, we talk about trading with the Vikings. They actually had a trade route at one point. But now, of course, that it's being discovered by the dominant population, now people are starting to listen. For those of you in this area that we're in, here's a story about a local discovery that was made. They found a 1,200-year-old canoe right here in Lake Mendota, showing that the Vikings didn't just come to the shores, they actually came through the Great Lakes. They traded with all of the northern indigenous peoples. So proof that there were settlers that came here that actually honored the people that were here. So without further ado, I would like to turn this over to our first presenter, who will share with us some oral traditions and oral histories. I know originally we had scheduled Tukaya, but she on Wednesday got a call to go help direct a production in New York City. So she is very busy today. So we did instead, which is not to say that there's any difference here at all, just someone else is filling in, is Samantha Bowling. And she is a comedian, which is actually a wonderful addition to what we're doing here, because humor is actually one of the most important parts of Indigenous American culture. And I'll let her talk about that a little. Samantha Bowling is Cherokee mixed Algonquin descent. She is a writer, performer, living and working in Los Angeles, the ancestral lands of the Chumash, Tongva, Kitch people. She is a 6-year veteran of the Native Voices Artists Ensemble at the Autry Museum on Tongva land, and her work can be seen in Back to Awesome on iTunes and Amazon Prime, Tomb Invader on Sci-Fi, and Blood Brothers and on Lifetime Movie Network. She recently completed an artist residency at the Merrimack Repertory, sorry if I misread that, theater on Pawtucket and Pennacook land in Lowell, Massachusetts, where she had the utmost honor of playing Betsy Chamberlain, one of the first female published comedy writers in America, who also happened to be a mixed race Native woman in MRT's original play, The Lowell Offering. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Samantha Bowling and let her take over.
Hello, everyone. Can you see me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm just gonna dive on in. Okay. Every summer, our church youth group goes on a summer trip, usually to a church camp like Big Stuff Camp, where we spend a week in Panama City, Florida, in our bathing suits on the beach, learning about why sex before marriage will damn us all to hell forever and make us have miserable, worthless lives. Sometimes we go to a Young Life camp where we learn to be cool Christian kids so that we can convert other kids to Jesus through our coolness. But every now and then somebody draws a short stick and we have to go on a mission trip. My freshman year in high school is one of those years. My mom is thrilled about this. She tells me and my siblings all the time that we need a mission trip because we don't know how good we have it. I'm kind of bummed because I was looking forward to vacation with my church friends, but I'm hopeful. I've heard of kids in my school who go on mission trips to places like Belize or Honduras or Haiti, places where you can pick mangoes that grow wild and there's palm trees. They announce where we're going for a mission trip, one of the most poverty-stricken places in the world, McDowell County, West Virginia. And I'm like, huh? West Virginia? That's in the United States. All my life at church, I've heard of those poor, hopeless wretches in Africa who've never heard of Jesus, or those poor, hopeless wretches in China who have never heard of Jesus, or whatever. The point of a mission trip is to convert people to Jesus. Pretty sure they already have Jesus in West Virginia, and I know this because my family is from there, and my family is very pro-Jesus. My grandma loves Jesus, and she grew up in West Virginia during the coal boom. West Virginia is part of the ancestral lands of the Cherokee. And we're Cherokee. It was very weird to think that this place is one of the most poverty-stricken places in the world because I was always told that America is the greatest and richest country because of Jesus, probably. We pull up in our church bus to the abandoned high school where we will be staying. You heard that right, abandoned high school. This place is so poor. How poor is it that the property taxes the town brings in don't cover the expenses of running a school? So the very few children in this area are all homeschooled, which is possible because after the coal boom ended, all the jobs did too. So parents stay home with their kids. As we drive around, we see what used to be grocery stores that are now abandoned warehouses, and what used to be government buildings that are now abandoned warehouses, and what used to be churches that are now still churches somehow. It's bizarre to see this ghost town, knowing that when my grandma lived here during the coal boom, this was one of the most happening places in the country, but now vines creep in through the windows of houses nearly burned up. Technology comes and goes, but nature never becomes obsolete, and it's beautiful to see the land that some of my ancestors came from breathing clean, smoke-free air again. I let my window down and the air smells familiar, like fresh summer leaves and lilacs, and creeks run through the mountains, giving everything a naturally electrifying buzz. At our high school base camp, the other two churches that we've partnered with for the mission, one of them is from Georgia and has a star student named Darren who proudly announces every chance he gets that he wants to be a preacher. The other church is from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That one's Bailey's church. Bailey's 15, like me. She's a white girl with brown eyes and blonde hair that she ties into a ponytail with bangs that she sweeps to one side and an accent that fascinates me. Oh, and she wears nurse's scrubs and sweatpants. She's sassy but shy, and it slowly becomes my only mission to make her giggle. I don't know yet that I'm queer. I've spent so much of my energy up until this point in my life desperately trying to desexualize myself at every turn. Church camps are constantly warning me about the dangers of being attractive and how it's fundamentally unkind of me to give boys boners. And my gymnastics coach preaches to me bi-weekly about all the reasons boys are scum. And if I ever get a chance to castrate one, I should take it while I'm still young because juvie's not as bad as real prison. My sexuality isn't something that I'm allowed to explore or enjoy for myself. I'm more of an administrator than active participant. I can either ration it off to a man who's proven he's worthy by putting his money where his mouth is and marrying me, or I can bury it frantically like a squirrel. I also know that the gay debate is heated right now, as other less conservative churches are beginning to consider that, hear me out, maybe God doesn't hate fags. This is the utmost blasphemy in my conservative Presbyterian church, and hearing homosexuality as a sin is about as commonplace as a greeting in our community. How you doing? I wish you the joy of the Lord this morning. Homosexuality is a sin. So as someone who is doing the good Lord's work of bleaching the sex right out of my sundress, I don't think there's any context for my attention toward Bailey. I'm just innocently, undeniably drawn to her. We work in warm, fresh sunlight for hours. Me making fart jokes with Bailey, who calls farts poots, and has her t-shirt sleeves rolled up over her shoulders like a cool person. When it comes time for lunch, our group leader, John, pulls out a loaf of Wonder Bread that has been magically turned into peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the whole group, water into wine, and our hands are covered in roof dust. So Bailey and I ask if we can wash our hands. Darren, the wannabe preacher who is also in our group, says, God made dirt, so dirt don't hurt. And I think but don't say, I hate to break it to you, but according to the people at my church, God also made AIDS, and AIDS, I have heard, are painful, depending on how many of them are in your system. John tells us to go ask Luann, the owner of the house, if we can wash our hands downstairs. We climb down the ladder and knock on the front door. There's no reply. And when we call up to John, he says, she may have stepped out, just go ahead on in. We walk in the front door, and even though it's the middle of a sunny June day, it's very dark inside. There are dusty curtains on the windows and very little decoration on the wood panel walls. Dishes in the sink. We walk up to the sink and turn the knob, and no water comes out. I got your water right here, says a voice behind us. We turn to see Luann, and I'm like, phew, another brown person, thank God. She's maybe in her late 60s, a light-skinned black woman, thin as a rail, and a haircut that reminds me of Marge's sisters in The Simpsons, which I'm not allowed to watch. And yet, how do I know that reference? She carries in her hands a metal pail full of water, and she sets it down next to the sink. She says, water's in the spigot outside if you need more, and she turns to go. I thank her and ask if she has any soap. Soap? Yes, please, to wash our hands, I said in my best country church girl voice. Luann turns around and opens the cabinet under her sink. There's a single canister of Comet in the cabinet, nothing more. She sets it on the countertop. No, sorry, I mean like soap, to wash our hands. Yeah, like hand soap, comes in Bailey with the assist. Honey, that's all I can afford. You want soap? There you go, Luann says with a hand wave as she disappears into her room. Bailey and I look at each other, bewildered. Is this stuff safe to use on our hands? I've never even seen Comet, let alone touched it. Maybe my mom was right. We dip our hands into the bucket of water and shake out the powder soap into our palms and rub our hands together, creating a thin, grainy paste. We dip our hands back into the bucket and shake them out and call a thank you to Luann as we go outside and giggle about the awkwardness, semi-anxious that our hand skin will start smoking when it hits the sunlight like vampires. As I eat my PBJ, I wonder how much Comet costs. I wonder about Luann. I wonder how Bailey manages to look so comfortable sitting balanced on a paint can on a sloped rooftop with her hammer tucked into the waistband of her scrubs. On the van ride back to the high school, I ask John, who's a deacon at the church where they're helping, who Luann is. He says she lives alone and doesn't have any family. I ask if she's a member of the church. He says no, that she was invited when she came to apply for help with her roof, but has never come to the services. I guess she has no intention of converting. I wonder if Luann's is the kind of life you get stuck with if you don't. I think that's the scariest thing in the world, to have to live like that. The next day, I wear my pajama pants to work because they're the closest thing I have to scrubs. When it comes time to eat lunch, Bailey and I look at each other like, are we going to do that again? And silently decide that God
blah, blah.
did.
I didn't think it was gonna be this, though, so we'll see.
Can you mute Jane? Sorry, she just.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Apologies, go ahead.
Okay. When it comes time to eat lunch, Bailey and I look at each other like, are we going to do that again? And silently decide that God did make dirt and maybe it's worth the risk. I do, however, have to venture down into the lair of a woman who was so poor that I'm afraid of her to use the bathroom later that day. She does have running water in her toilet, I find out. And she usually has running water in the whole house. It just needs to be reconnected and the church people haven't gotten to it yet. In her bathroom, she has an old-timey looking photo sitting on the sink. It's black and white and features a woman dressed up in a burlesque can-can dress looking seductively over her shoulder. Before my brain can even register what I'm seeing, it goes ding, 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 sin. As I climb back onto the roof, I wonder why a woman would have a photo like that in her bathroom. I know sometimes my guy friends at school huddle up around Victoria's Secret catalogs circulating the hallways at lunch, and I've been taught in church that men's brains are hardwired to zone in on anything that could be construed in any way as sexy, so we have to hide our butts and boobs from them, you know, like the moon hides from werewolves. But women, she lives there alone. There are no men around to appreciate a photo like that, so why would she have it? The next 2 days it rains, so we can't go play with hammers on the roof. Instead, we explore the classrooms in the abandoned high school where we're staying with my youth pastor, Ryan. He's a new guy who comes to us from a hip, non-denominational organization. He's not Presbyterian. He's just doing this for a job. He quickly becomes one of my favorite people because he's so funny, and he makes demonstrative shows of moving away from me when I bump his elbow on accident, saying, "Ah, we can't touch elbows. We're not married," as he boots me in the nose. He makes me feel like I'm not cursed for being pretty. We walk through the classrooms where everything is covered in an inch of settled dust, and old-timey chairs with desktops attached to the backs lay strewn about the room as if someone pushed them over in a defeated rage and didn't see the use in putting them back upright. We keep repeating how strange it is to see evidence of civilization. Sincere bewilderment that this place used to be a viable candidate for residency. Bailey and I stand at the window and watch the rain pour down as a squirrel burrows himself in the hollow knob of a tree branch at our eye level. Bailey laughs. Squirrels are so funny. Why is that? They run around burying their nuts and stuff all over the place and forget where they put them. That's how trees get planted in the forest. What? No, you're joking. I swear it is true. Anybody tell you God doesn't have a sense of humor is lying to you. We laugh and laugh, tickled with delight at the ironic design of creation. And even though it's raining, and even though the windows are covered over in vines, these abandoned rooms feel brighter than inside Luann's house, which I know is probably leaking right now because we're shit roofers. I often throughout my life find myself thinking back to what our lives on this continent used to be like before the colonizers came. What a day in the life might have been like for my ancestral grandmother that lived on these lands, and it's easy to imagine. She, like Luann, was incredibly self-sufficient. She didn't go to a spigot to get her water. She went to a river where she washed herself every day in the water that ran clean, free from coal dust and bleach. She didn't use soap because back then God really had made dirt, and dirt really didn't hurt because it wasn't corrupted by chemical contaminants. But if she wanted to smell nice, she could crush lilacs between her palms and rub them on her skin. She likely believed in a benevolent higher power like God, but they were genderless, and she called them Une Lanahi, creator. She ate food she planted herself or fish she trapped herself, and she lived in a community with lots of people she called her family, who, if she or anyone else just so happened to be what we would call queer, wouldn't have batted an eyelash. She would have been embraced, as if Une Lanahi made her that way on purpose, the way they made squirrels forgetful on purpose, and her community would have protected and cared for her as a sacred part of a whole. She was not here alone, not like Luann. Even though the outsiders removed the Cherokee from this place and converted it to an industrial mecca of consumption, somehow my grandma's family managed to stay under the radar by converting to Christianity. That's how she grew up here during the coal boom, and that I cannot picture, seeing it now abandoned, knowing how it turns out. It only exists now, vacuously empty, or way back when, perfectly complete. Our last night in West Virginia, after a hot dog and Kool-Aid cookout outside in the wet grass, Darren is invited to address the group. He's been brimming with excitement all day, telling everyone that he's going to get to preach tonight, and he can't wait to share with us what he's planning. We sit on folding chairs with styrofoam plates bending from the weight of our coleslaw and hot dogs and listen. He preaches a really sweet sermon about how Christians make the mistake of focusing so much on Jesus' death that they forgot why he went through it. Not to say, look what you made me do throughout eternity, guilting us into being good, but to free us from the guilt we feel when we inevitably mess up because we're human. We can't do anything so bad that Jesus would stop loving us. And if we're sufficiently grateful for his love, then we naturally want to be good. Christianity for him is about being free, living in joy, without guilt. I was expecting hellfire and brimstone. Everything I'd grown up with was so buttoned up in, let's turn in your pew books to 1 Corinthians chapter 90, 12, verse McGillicuddy. But Darren's sermon is electrifying, liberating, beautiful, and he's overflowing with joy and love, and so am I, as he says that he feels bad for everyone who isn't a Christian because they don't get to live free like us, and that because we have the light of Jesus in us, we don't have to be slave to our sins, saying we don't have to live like them. People who are slaves to the dollar because Jesus makes us wealthy. People who are slaves to their impure thoughts, the homosexuals and the child molesters, because Jesus makes our thoughts clean. People who are, I space out at that point, not necessarily traumatized by what he just said, but my mind just turns off, does not compute, as if trying to access a memory or emotion that's been deleted. I try to stay in that moment of elation. The feeling is slipping through my fingers so fast, like waking up from a vivid dream where I can't remember the world I was just so viscerally living in, hoping if I fall back to sleep, I can stay there longer. I have no idea how long I'm tapped out. Just sitting there, staring blankly ahead, drinking my bleach or Kool-Aid. It feels like I'm hearing mutually exclusive things, but I can't put my finger on what is so confusing. So I just chalk it up to me being, I guess, broken and dumb. And I tap back into the sermon to see Ryan looking at me like a deer in headlights, subtly pulling on his shirt collar, as Darren is wrapping up, now weeping. I just love y'all so much, and my heart is filled with so much joy that I get to be here with you and just celebrate with you that God brought us together to live in joy and freedom. He punches the air like the freeze frame at the end of The Breakfast Club, which I'm also not allowed to watch. But again, how do I know that reference? I look around and people are crying and hugging each other and smiling and clapping. So I cry and smile and clap, hoping that if I bullshit well enough, people won't suspect that I was not paying attention. Somebody starts playing Christian rock music. We all get up and dance and eat more hot dogs after preaching about freedom in the stolen lands of the Cherokee, surrounded by indentured people too destitute to pick up and start again. We don't see Luann again, and I don't find out what happened to her. I hope her roof turned out okay, but I rather doubt it. I imagine her standing at her sink, rinsing the pasty comet off her dishes with the water leaking in from the ceiling. And voila, there you have it. The church people really did hook up her indoor plumbing. Before I get on the bus the next morning, I exchange AOL screen names with Bailey. We small talk online for maybe 2 weeks, and then I forget her, like a dream slipping through my fingers. Or maybe like a squirrel accidentally planting a forest. Thank you.
Thank you. If those of you who are listening want to unmute yourself and clap, feel free to. Just please sure to go ahead and mute yourself again afterwards. Thank you so much, Sam. That was beautiful. We'll get back to you when we talk about the question and answer part, because I do have some questions about how well you weave together humor and reality, and that was amazing. Thank you. So just as a little bridge before we get to our next presenter, I wanted to continue discussing with you the difference between oral history and written history. And recently, some of you may have, oh, I need to share my screen again, don't I? That's how that works. I'm more of a sit under a tree and listen to play my guitar kind of person, but here we go, okay. You may have recently heard in the news about Native children being found buried under boarding schools, both in Canada and America. And again, this is nothing new to us. We've known this all along. I wrote a poem for them. It's actually going to be published. It is published in an anthology that just came out last week, I think. This is called Unmarked No More. Try to disguise lies. History books may deny oral traditions, while Native children rise again to remind us past crimes are still here. Remains revealed built upon these buried truths, don't let them forget. Little ones call out, try to keep our past buried, spirits still shall rise. Little ones call out, try to keep our past buried, our ghosts still shall dance. To Kaya, who was not able to be here today, sends her regards, says thank you, hope she can work with us in the future. She is working with the Every Child Matters movement, which is helping to bring the remains of all of the Native children who were found back to their original ancestral lands so that they can be treated properly and with the respect that they deserve. So hopefully we will hear from her in the future. I have future programs that I'm planning. I will talk to them and try to coerce them into letting us do that. Anyway, without further ado, we will move on to our second presenter for the day. Tezozomoc is a Los Angeles Chicana poet and 2009 Oscar-nominated activist, and has been published by Floricanto Press, Gashes, Poems, and Pain from the Halls of Injustice, a collection of poetry. He has been published in several journals and anthologies as well, and is also a board member, and if I butcher this, please correct me when you come on, Asiquia Institute, a grant-making collective focused on supporting indigenous knowledge and agro-ecosystems by protecting native crops. His work to defend a South Central Los Angeles community garden was featured in the 2008 Academy Award-nominated documentary, The Garden. So without any further ado, I give you Mr. Tezozomoc. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me here. Am I coming through clear?
Yes.
All right. Namaka Netwa and Tezozomoc. My name is Tezozomoc. I want to acknowledge, the lands of the ancestors we are participating on, as you mentioned earlier, and also acknowledge the Tongva and the Chumash where I reside. And then today I'm actually in Chichimeca lands in central Mexico where I'm coming through. So hopefully everything will come through. I'm a little different of a type of writer. I'm more of a kind of critical thinker. And part of the work that I started to do about 30 years ago was to think about, as indigenous people, how do we restore our archetypal concepts in writing? Like, how do we want to talk about ourselves? And so much of my work is really centered on what Ward Churchill calls destructuring, not deconstruction, but destructuring the categorical concepts that are used to define us. So this piece, I wrote this piece specifically for this presentation here, and it's titled The Bipolar Nature of Dominion. Dick Pelz, at the time professor of social theory of knowledge in the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Groningen, Netherlands, scholar in residence at the Amsterdam School for Social Science Research, published in December 1998 via Routledge, the publishing house, a book titled Property and Power in Social Theory, a study in intellectual rivalry. Dick Pelz unravels the dialectics of social scientific dichotomies and provides a novel and informative way of organizing 20th century social theory. In particular, for this essay, the restoration of dominion as domain, and as I will clarify, as sovereignty. In Western social thought, power and property have been central concerns of political theory, jurisprudence, sociology, history, and political economy. They play a pivotal role in theories of social inequality and class formation. We stumble into the liberal dualism of, and this is very critical for this essay, a propertyless power versus powerless property. It's an interesting distinction, which don't reflect a logical essence or a timeless fact of nature, increasingly split the inclusive feudal conception of dominium or domain into political and economic compartments. The old Roman unitary notion that encompassed dominium and imperium as sovereignty. As the legist of the 11th and 12th century Renaissance Bologna attempted to selectively rebuild the edifice of Roman law to support the central theme of feudalism via its retro theocracy and abandon constituted and or constituency, democracy left behind by the fall of the Roman Empire in the 900s. We are left to ponder the recursive semantic chain of the reanimated and antique distinction between dominium and imperium, property and sovereignty. Two interesting forms of domination. One, by economics as expressed via its main mechanics of embargoes. Two, as we see like in Cuba, Cuba is embargoed economically because they can't take its sovereignty away. And two, by empire, vis its sovereignty. So for example, Iraq was a great example of going in and taking the vessel and trying to empty it and take away its sovereignty, and then we install an occupational government. Today, we see these two semantic forms expressed via two dominant groups, liberal Democrats and the neocon Republicans. But let's take a step back. We have also seen them in two forms of colonization. The Spanish approach with latent behavior from the old Roman integrationist extension of the empire achieved by intermarriage, assimilation of natives into the Spanish Catholicism, and teaching the social norms of the Spanish. On the other hand, we've seen an approach taken by attempting to empty the vessels of occupation via extermination, genocide, and the concept of automatic banishment, which I'll come back to. The British colonies settled in North America have been referred to as an empire of commerce, little involvement from the crown, the colonist tribe, to settle and establish their own way of life. Instead of integrating with First Nations, they view them as savages, using them only for trade, such as exchanging furs for firearms and for their land, which they occupied and settled on. Spanish were authorized with the monarchy to conquer new territory for the Spanish Empire, to increase trade, spread Catholicism, what we can clearly see as dominium via economic integrationist domination. British colonists, on the other hand, had little interest in establishing a bond with the natives, continuing the English tradition of expansion through colonization and trade, and concentrating on enhancing their wealth via plantations and the tobacco industry. So today, when you hear approaches from the liberal Democrats and the neocon Republicans, we can clearly observe the two different forms of domination: economic, financial, integrationist in tolerance, tolerating us, they tolerate us, and the emptying out of the imperium, meaning the vessel of categorical, impermissible bodies. So like, we don't want you, we want you out of this territory. Quoting Leah Harris, a mother, storyteller, playwright, and activist, a trauma survivor, she quotes, I quote her as human animals, we're living in environments that cause emotional and physiological incoherence. While we may not be able to eradicate the systems that imprison us immediately, we stand a far better chance if we don't get tricked into thinking our struggles or the solutions to them are individual. Historical, transgenerational, semiotic, categorical, traumatic stress is a potential predictor of emotional abusiveness and trauma levied by those in society with more power against those with less power. The SOMA registry, physical ill health is coextensive with intensive emotional discomfort that is socially inscribed by semiotic categorization, and the limited subjectivity is not unique to any specific individual. Psychological studies indicate social semiotic categorical induced trauma is widespread, confirmed by 89 to 91% of racialized, gendered, class, sexually oriented, specious, spiritualized, environmentalized, and mentalized minorities. Survey stating social categorizations are linked to societal trauma, intergenerational trauma, social categorical incident-based trauma, insidious trauma, psychological trauma, and emotional abusiveness, such that in 2007, Psychological researcher Robert T. Carter forcibly argued, quote, a key notion associated with definitions of racism is the emphasis on personal character rather than on systemic process, pointing out to systemic categorical discrimination over personal character creates subjectivization motivated by a permissible system of discrimination that overlooks the fact that the group in power defines what is acceptable and what is not. The system thusly chastising the marginal subject without ever needing to consider its motivation or process. Thus, the process of one, tolerating categorical discrimination via the liberal democracy and financial domination. Two, emptying the sovereign space by the neocon republicanism of just don't be marginalized category. Don't be brown, don't be red, don't be yellow, don't be poor, don't be Indian, obfuscates the purpose of this violence, hiding it behind a veneer of science and objectivity. Sometimes the purpose is banishment, removing us from our homes and communities. Sometimes it's containment, restricting us from the areas police want to secure for gentrification. Sometimes it's blight, targeting areas for neglect in order to maintain racial and class hierarchies. And sometimes it's extraction, exploiting our wealth, labor, or resources. And sometimes it's elimination, killing or incarcerating our people. Whatever the purpose, what links these practices is the process of conquest. Displacement is when you have somewhere else to go. Banishment is when there's nowhere except jail or death. Pete White. Both decolonization and abolition are not simply seeking an end result. Instead, they are continuous creative processes and an imagining of a life beyond prisons and the theft of land. Charles Sepulveda. And peace.
Do you have more to share with us, sir, or is that?
I do, I have more.
Excellent, excellent.
All right. So I am going to go to a piece that is titled Big Sky Hunting Drivelines. This was a piece that was written up in the Prairie Valley up in Montana. And before the Clovis period, the hunting practice was to take the buffalo and run them on a ridge, and then they would be pointed towards a cliff. And that was the practice before the bow and arrow and the use of the large lance at that time. The Big Sky grass grazers eroded all the rhyolithic and basaltic grandfather rocks, kicking up dust storms like the recoil of a wind serpent as at the moment of darkest concentration, striking with fangs full of gale force. We found ourselves picking at elk droppings and pretending to make luxurious beaded works for the trading posts. We saw her plowing towards us down the ancient buffalo runners. We had seen her rolled out from the metamorphic Gneissian tile work of the Mesa Southeast River near Sheep Creek. She was serious, but we laughed at her, thinking we were smarter than her ways or her wisdom. We joked as buffalo clowns, pretending to summarize the meaning of spirit with circles and asphalt and coyote laughs, that earth was one giant molten rock, that smoking was cancerous, that there was no eagle in the sky, no pipe on the land, that the pale government had a waiting list for distribution of eagle feathers, the sage was called clary, and there was nothing sweet about sweetgrass. We also laughed because we spoke in English, not Arapaho or Algonquian or Comanche. We laughed more from shame than any ill will towards each other. We excused our faith, contending not even Curtis Kilreads 350 riders to Wounded Knee had healed the shattered hoop. We had not accepted Black Elk's words, great spirit, make the hoop strong and let my people walk through and find the red cord, make my people come to life. We were tainted by the cynicism of Black Kettle's actions and innocence. He had taken the president's white peace to heart, considering great chief of all the pale people, and he could do nothing to defend the Sand Creek massacre, which today is that anniversary. Only his words remain, nothing lives long except the earth and the mountains. Lakota woman was hoofing and growling, angry with us. She had spoken with the elders. She had spoken with the women. She had spoken with the children, and we were the last, and we seemed unable to reconcile such great abandon from ritual and ceremony. She threw herself on the ground, rolled for us, demonstrating her different colors of anger. We were still so numb from the days of trading our childhood ponytails for scholastic pieces of candy and having our leather vests burned in trash piles at the residential schools, that we could not bring ourselves to consciousness. And we missed the significance of the great Lakota white buffalo calf woman's words as she ran us down the Big Sky Bison drive lines over the cliffs. And peace. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, you got another one for us, or is that all you got today?
Well, let's do Q&A, and if we have more time, we could do some more, I think.
Okay.
Those are
absolutely. So just to move us on to the next part here real quick, I'll kind of give you one more time. Let's give a hand for Mr. Tezozomoc, please. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to thank him for his presence with us. Your next presenter is me. Oh, and I again forget to do this because I'm bad at this stuff. Share screen. Okay, so Beowulf is a Shawnee, Gypsy, Jew, socialist, justice, humanist who sees tattoos as physical manifestations or emotional scars and lost count of his somewhere around 20. He has traveled this earth and performed for the last 35 years on stages with National Poetry Slam teams in the Southwest and Northeast to poetry and music stages in Canada and New Zealand. His mixed heritage has guided him through life, through his creative process, through most of his life, and he hopes he is using his creative gifts to continue the long tradition of the ancestors by passing on lessons through oral history, but also has published his debut book of poetry, 2020 Division, available on Amazon. This world makes no sense to me, so I make music and poetry. And so this poem that I'm going to share with you now is just kind of a little look into my history and how I came to understand my Indigenous heritage. Tonkashalawakataka, Palamiaye, Aho, Ritako Yasin. Iye Maska Wagalihuni, I am Tox White, and I have arrived in my homeland. I did not ask to be born on the white side of the tracks, to have my blood thinned pale. I did not ask to be grown in shrink-wrapped suburbs where summer camp reduced my Indigenous heritage to Indian arts and crafts. I did not ask for a bleached mother, blood drained of all color, because image was more important than imagination and appearance meant more than my past. I did not ask for the honor words that a Lakota man once gifted to me, even though I did not ask for them. You don't have to have red skin to have a red heart and journey the red road. Leah Petoki Lilawashte. Today is a good day, but not to die. You see, I cannot tell a lie. I ain't got time for that uncertain future because I'm still too busy trying to decipher my past. It would appear that manifest destiny has captured my destiny. So now I'm not even quite sure what my ancestry is, but from what I've been able to gather, the story goes a little something like this. Many, many moons ago, some random Trader Joe just fell in with the Shawnees, and then it seems that he just took one of their nieces because he was raging about being disrespected on what was already a good trade, but just like any other treaty being tossed out to the tribes, he failed to mention the bribes or extortion or the shape-shifting ways of terms and conditions, though like most white men, he had plenty of ammunition for any retort they might have had. To make a long story short, it would appear that dear old granddad went out on a binge and brought himself home an Indian girl. Now, she might not have been an official slave, but she gave and gave and gave and gave until he planted his seeds. But somehow she found some inner solace by tending to their needs. Meanwhile, somewhere along the line, that family line met up with that of another tragic storyline. One where Mercedes may not have manufactured the ovens, but I bet you can guess who assembled their cars, leaving decades of scars. So I was forced to heal, boy, heal in Hebrew school, but I still remember all the things that my family forgot. Now, this may seem like a shot, but I never did quite get the difference between a chosen people and a master race. So I choose to walk a different path, one that leads away from just passing on 2 strains of a legacy virus that equal 1 long history of genocide. Now, I may not be chosen, but I still have pride. So I will teach the children that the colonizers lie. There are bigger pictures out there. And if we don't teach them how to see, then they will become missing pieces of a fragmented puzzle, just like me, who took 30 some odd years to recognize that mixed blood is only skin deep. Even though years ago, an aunt named Adam gave me these words to keep. Beneath the white, there is a red skin, suffering from centuries of taming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for encouraging my behavior. So now I would like to move on to the next portion here. One thing that I wanted to share with you all is, I always forget to share the screen. Yeah, I'm gonna get good at this one of these days when I'm sitting under a tree playing my acoustic guitar. Share screen. There we go. Okay. In Native cultures, the sacred circle brings with it a sacred number, the number 4. 4 peoples, 4 corners of the earth, 4 directions, 4 winds. And today we've had 2 presenters plus myself makes 3. So where does number 4 come in? How do we complete the circle? Well, that's all of you. So the purpose of today was to kind of share with you some of the histories through oral histories that have not really coincided with the written histories that you may have learned. So please complete the circle, become number 4, go out, find more, learn more, tell people about it. So in an effort to do that, we're going to go ahead and have ourselves a little Q&A session. So please feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to speak with us. If you have questions that you would like to ask, things of that nature. I'm going to go ahead and start it off real quick. Samantha, if you're there, if you want to come back to us. So for this part. So my first question I wanted to ask you, Sam. One thing that, as I said in my poem, I came to understand my Native heritage and my Native roots later in life. And when I was living in South Dakota and living on Crow Creek Reservation, Pine Ridge, Rosebud, one of the things that I noticed is how integral humor was in the culture, and just like to the point where it's just a part of life. And like, for instance, if someone in the community was behaving in a way that wasn't acceptable, we didn't target them, we didn't point them out, we didn't call them out, we teased them. Which, you know, to get with the program, right? And so your work, it seems to me like it is very interwoven with that as well, because it's not just the humor, but it's the reality of life mixed in with that humor. And it seems that you presented that really well. So please speak on that. What was that like for you? How has that encouraged your process, et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that too. I think that humor is maybe a more comfortable way to strive for accountability with things, because I think sometimes we get into a pattern of behaving and we don't sort of recognize incongruencies between how we behave and what we preach to believe or life philosophies. And sometimes someone just pointing out those incongruencies in a way that sort of also gives sort of a release valve for whatever tension might arise in that. It can just be a gentler way to sort of say, just like what you said, get with the program. I do know what you're talking about with sort of being disconnected from a culture. growing up. I think that's a big part of the point of colonization, is sort of, you know, to know that there's strength in numbers, and so if you want to overpower, you kind of have to create isolation, and my family was definitely an island. I grew up in a town so homogeneously white that I didn't pass. My family didn't pass, which in Southern California is kind of crazy now that I live here and there's so much diversity. I you know, deal more with erasure now in different ways than I did growing up, but humor was always really big for us, just because we needed a way to sort of justify and acknowledge, just so that we didn't feel like we were crazy, just how much we didn't fit in there. But also, I think humor for me developed in some ways as a not a defense mechanism, but just sort of like sort of in the way that a lot of people of color sort of become like the class clown, or sort of, I don't want to say minstrel, but that, you know, when you come from a group of people that aren't necessarily taken seriously, you kind of have to use that to your advantage, rather than to just accept that you don't deserve to be taken seriously. You just, I know Mark Twain writes a lot of characters that sort of use people's underestimation of them to their own advantage. And I think that our people are a great example of that. So yeah, that's what I have to say about humor.
So just a quick follow-up question that I thought of while you were saying that.
Sure.
So given what you mentioned about, you know, marginalized identity and becoming the minstrel, you know, how do you feel about sports mascots?
Oh, I don't like them. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. You know, it's what it feels like to me is, it feels like a caricature of a culture that's been erased, where it's like you're only allowed to be celebrated in this way that we find entertaining, as if we're pets, in a way that I think is really unfair. You know, when you have people who wear something sacred like headdresses to a football game, and do what, you know,
The tomahawk.
caricatured, Indian dances when we were burned and assaulted and genocided for those exact same things. You know, the definition of appropriation is, you know, that the originating group of people is punished for something that the dominating group of people can enjoy freely, and that's exactly what mascots are. And you know, they've done so many studies about how damaging it is for Native people to have their identity is sort of cartoonized, made into a cartoon, the way that they are. And so yeah, I don't support it. I think it's bad.
Thank you. Then I have, just to switch gears, Tezozomoc, I have a question, and then we'll open this up to everyone else. So in the infamous, I've known you a bit longer, sir, and I have come to know your work. And in the infamous words of the amazing comedian Bill Hicks, we got ourselves a reader here. So one thing that I've noticed in your work that you do, and I don't know if this is deliberate or if it's just a side effect of how you do your work and who you are, but I have noticed that you go a long way towards breaking stereotypes without coming out and saying that that's what you're doing. And you do it in a way, like a lot of people will be like, oh, we got a Native American poet coming, you know, he's gonna hit us with this and this and this. And then you're like, bam, I'm gonna give you philosophies and I'm gonna give you studies. And that's unexpected because of the caricatures and the stereotypes. But you still hold true to the spiritual centers of where some of those stereotypes have come from, like, you know, being one with the land and understanding what it is to be part of a tribal family and things of that nature. So I'm just curious if you would like to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, thanks. I think that that's part of the trickster part of me. I think part of the humor that Samantha is also talking about is a little bit about, like, you know, is that we have to do some kind of trickery, and part of the literary aspect of this is to use the form, to use the elements of epiphany, use the elements of the sandwiching, the stories, use the archetypal constructs. And this is what I was honing in a little bit at the beginning, which is much of my work is, as I always make this comparison, is a lot of the issues that Indigenous people have dealt with in terms of philosophy, politics, ideology. We've already done a lot of this process. It's just that our epistemologies are not permissible. They're not allowed. So part of the work that I'm trying to do is how do you present, how do you legitimize epistemologies so that you can enter what we call an ontological state, which means a state of being, because we can't really be if we can't be allowed to acknowledge our epistemologies. And epistemology is, we're bootstrapped to the territory. We are bootstrapped to the land. We're bootstrapped, like you said, we belong to the land. The land feeds us. And that was part of that essay. It was this discussion about how these permissible categories determine what's permissible, what's impropriety, right? Like, for example, I'll give you a great example. Like in the US, it's class, gender, it's race, gender, class, right? In Mexico, it's actually inverted because of the effect of the colonization. It's actually in Mexico, it's class, it's gender, then it's race, right? And then you can continue to add, like, okay, sexual orientation, what kind of religion, your spirituality, your kind of mental health, and then let's go to another part of the world where spirituality may be the priority category that determines permissibility, right? And so this was the categories of traumatization, or the categories of positive psychological effect, are the elements that, like, we have to find these concepts to then, for us to begin to do the work that, for example, Margie DeWitt out of the Inuit, about intergenerational trauma, all that great work that she's been doing up there, that we can start to then say, yeah, we know how to process these things, we know how to deal with these things, but we have to, within just even ourselves, acknowledge our epistemologies of territory, land, being in the world, we have to enter into that state of being finally. And I think part of the destructuring is, yes, I want to show you that this is what is currently permissible, but it's not the only option, right? That's the only impossibility if we accept that reality. But if we say, well, we know we've had these other realities, we've had these other ways of being, why can't we? Like, I'm thinking of a great example is words before all other things. Like, we put ourselves in, like, from a species perspective, we put ourselves at the lowest point, and we begin to name everything else before us before we get to, because we're really at the bottom, right? So that's like inverting the notion of species, where we tend to think in Western thought as anthropomorphic, where human beings are primary. Like, we inverted in the Great Law, and we end up at the bottom. Like, we're at the low end of the spectrum, whereas everything else is privileged or more permissible than the rest of us. So think about that concept. What does that do to you, right? Like, to invert these kind of categories in the sense of semiotics, and what kinds of legitimations of epistemology can you have in that situation? Does that help?
So, like any good trickster, using the colonizers' methods against them. Yes, awesome.
That was a long way to say that, yes.
Oh, sorry?
I said that was a long way to say that, yes.
We have a couple of really good questions in the chat. So, Mike, if you want to unmute and ask your question directly and have Sam answer it, that would be awesome. or I can read it for you.
I'm answered on chat, but
Okay. So Mike asked, what suggestions do you have for a Caucasian who experiences white privilege and white guilt at the same time, but would like to be an ally? And Samantha responds, Mike, great question. Step one is to listen. So if you're here, you're taking a great step forward. Keep listening, follow Native activists, and spend some time and energy really considering their perspectives. Oftentimes, when you meet people where they are, they'll let you know what they need. That's a great question and a great answer to that question. Phenomenal. Would you like to talk more about that, either of you, Mike or Samantha?
I can. I think a lot of people in privilege expect people that don't have the same privilege to take for granted the same resources that they do. You know, a lot of times the response when people find out about a need is like, well, why didn't you ask for it? When you come from a group of people like us who for so many years in so many different ways, when we asked for help, the opposite was given. You know, I think smallpox blankets and forced sterilization are really great examples of that. You know, they were offered as help, and really they were tools to further a genocide. We asked for health care and we were sterilized.
Can you go into that a little more? Not everyone knows about that. If you could share with us that.
Right. I guess that's, yeah, no, thank you. That's something that I guess I take for granted, that that, you know, I was told about these things, and I guess, yeah, a lot of that is sort of shrouded from popular society. Yeah, so you know, the colonizers gave us gifts as like peace offerings of blankets that were laced with smallpox bacteria, just sort of powdered in with the wash, and so they were exposed to this disease that we didn't have any immunity to, and it created it furthered the pandemic into our groups of people, and we lost like a third of our population.
What about the forced sterilization that you mentioned?
The forced
sterilization. What is that?
Women that would go in for medical care to white doctors. This happened to Native women and also Latino women, mostly Taino and mostly in the Caribbean. Against, you know, if they came in for a routine surgery like an appendectomy or you know, any routine surgery, they would against their will or knowledge be given hysterectomies. They would, if they came in for OBGYN care, they would have, against their will and knowledge, have IUDs or devices that caused infertility, or were given shots or drugs that would render them infertile. That was like, and they didn't find out about this until about a generation past, when, you know, all of these women were struggling to get pregnant and didn't know why, and they went to different doctors and found out that this had been done to them.
And for people who often will respond with, well, this was hundreds of years ago, but this was as recent as the 1970s. Yeah. This was happening. American Indian healthcare on the reservations, they had been doing this all along. So, and it just recently was uncovered in the mid-70s. So, you know, for people who think that this was all, you know, oh, why should I care about that? That was so long. No, this happened in our lifetime.
Yeah.
There, I would like to add to that it also happened during the Trump administration in the camps that they set up for people seeking asylum in the US.
Did you guys hear that? Did everyone hear that? Can you say that a little louder so everyone can hear?
It was also discovered, it broke the news like a few years ago during the Trump administration, during the camps that they set up in the southern border, of women who were seeking asylum, that they had the procedure done to them.
So this is as new as a few years ago. It's something that, and again, that's why oral history is so important, because a lot of times we don't hear about this until generations later. But if we listen to oral histories, we will find out about that. Absolutely. I think that this is a really good question. So I would like to, Mr. Tezozomoc, if you'd like to reply to that too. As someone who is experiencing both white privilege and white guilt, but wants to be an ally, what are some suggestions that you have?
Well, I want to double down on Samantha's very good suggestions, but I think that I think a lot of the things are about how people also have to decontextualize themselves from their privilege, and and this is a hard statement to make, like most when we try to be benevolent, it's mostly always driven from an ego-centered place. And so there's an expectation, and having worked in the nonprofit industry, it's like, you're always like, oh, how do we make the donors feel so awesome about themselves so that we can have their money, so that we can do good for the other people? It's a kind of double-edged sword. And I have met very few donors who are not ego-driven. And I think that part of that humbleization is part of, like, how do you become humble about being in space with people? And then, as Samantha was saying, how do you listen to the people? How do you, it's like sometimes we've also been in places where people from the outside come in and they bring so many resources that people don't know how to process, that it becomes a kind of like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so it's a kind of negotiated space that we have to keep constantly checking each other about what is possible, and I struggle with this because I've said, I've led social struggles with military government forces where 385 sheriffs and LAPD people have stormed us and put 50-40 people in jail. A lot of the people that were in DAPL were people that I trained in resistance and all these kinds of things. So I have a lot of kind of things to bring to this, but the idea is that there has to be a kind of de-education, becoming humble with yourself. And it's impossible to erase your ego, but how do you show up and participate? I've struggled with that answer completely myself. Some of it is doable. I've had some really wonderful allies. Dan Stormer, who's an incredible a lawyer from LA who helped us through much of our case, the Annenberg Foundation, many people, but still, there's this kind of negotiated space, that has to be worked through. And I think that it depends. It's on a case by case. It depends on the individuals. I mean, I'll tell you, there were moments where the work that I did where I had 35 different political, social types of groups all kind of battling, and then trying to negotiate with them how they could be participants, how they could be allies, how they were not being allies. And it's a tough situation, but I think we have to come to the table with kind of negotiating and transactioning across as with equity and a lot of love for each other, because it is a very kind of tenuous moment when things like that happen. And Samantha, I think you wanted to add something.
I do. I agree with you so much, and I heard it put really eloquently recently, where try not to come into the situation like a savior, and instead see yourself as an equal partner in equity and justice. What you bring to the table on resources, the people that you're meeting with, they also match what you bring in with understanding and perspective and experience, and those things are equally important. So you might have money and you might have privilege, and that's awesome. We do need that, but we also need our our perspective and our experience is to be honored. And so sort of like decentralizing your perspective and trying not to see the world through the white lens that you take for granted because the world accommodates you. Not everybody moves through the world that way. And so trying not to take what you know as granted. And that's a lot of unlearning. It's a lot of conscious, constantly thinking about this stuff. But it's
And I think one of the first steps is to, like I showed earlier in the presentation, realizing that things like the world map that we all see in K through 12 is false. And to recognize that and understand why that is and why it's important to realize what we need to do to change that. Absolutely. That was a great question, Mike. Thank you. Does anyone else on Zoom or anyone in the room? I mean, we have about 15 minutes left before we have to go, and I just want to make sure we get to any other questions. If there's anyone on Zoom, anyone in the room? Otherwise, if you each maybe have a short piece you'd like to close out with, we can do that. Or if we just want to say, have a wonderful day and thank you, that's up to you guys. Okay, Tezozomoc, do you have a short piece you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, let me see if I can do something fun.
And while you're looking that up, I just want to thank the Diversity Committee for having this program. Thank you very much. We are recording it and it will be available at some point after tomorrow, right? Okay, so if you missed it or if you only got to see part of it, we will be showing it again, so you can definitely see it. And again, thank you for everyone who participated. Thank you for having us here. Yes, I was just about to get to that. You'll see that there is a survey for this program that we just had. And in the chat, there's a link to it. And then for those of you who are seeing this later, you can see that there's the survey there. You can click on that if you're, or find us that way. And please do share with us on the survey what you thought, what you got out of it, how you feel. We would greatly appreciate that. So go ahead, Tez.
All right. So I'm going to close out with Coyote steals Blue Lake. Blue Lake was restored in the 1970s to the Taos Pueblo community. It was originally taken by the Forest Service early in the 1900s, and Blue Lake is considered one of their origin places where the Taos Pueblo people come in. So I feel very privileged to be able to tell this story. Coyote steals Blue Lake, Bawia. Rattlesnake crawled up on Towa, Coyote. Coyote lived in Towa Tana, Coyote home, by the chaparral near Bawia, Blue Lake. Rattlesnake, what are you doing in the dark of night by the fire? Coyote, I'm purifying myself for my scalp dance. We are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the steal of Blue Lake. Rattlesnake, why do you care? The Taina people, or more specifically, the Latina, Osier Willow people from Taos, are the most recalcitrant of the 19 Pueblo inhabitants. They would scalp you. Coyote looked away deeply into the lake, remembering the summer water ceremony of the young maiden and the male youth before Chipafunta, high water black cat, that is Black Spring, to prevent the reoccurrence of the legendary deluge. Towa took a deep breath and blistered his cheeks and released the air in a sight of burdened success. The moonlight shimmered off the cupric blue pre-Calderian mafic volcanic field waters. Coyote was not dissuaded by Rattler's fork obsidian tongue. Coyote unsheathed his coup stick, tasseled with beaded black hawk feathers, olivetta shells, and prairie dog fur. He smudged it with smoking sage bundle and a big abalone seashell. Towa is the spirit for warriors. He teaches the Latina Taos warriors how to win prestige, acts of bravery in the face of the enemy, Any blow struck against the enemy counts as coup. But most prestigious acts include touching an enemy warrior with a hand, a bow, or a coup stick, and escaping unharmed, touching the first enemy to die in battle, or touching the enemy's defensive works count as coup. Simply riding up on an enemy, touching him with a short stick, and riding away unscathed. Rattlesnake coiled its body and settled its head, sticking its keratin segments out the back, ready to accompany Coyote's scalp dance. Coyote sang, holding his coup stick. He spun and pointed his stick to the north, direction of Setshu, Conjilon Peak, spun around, direction of the south, pointing to Okipin, Sandia Crest. Rattlesnake was right on cue and was accompanying Coyote in his song and dance. If Rattlesnake had hands, it would be drumming. Coyote spun away and was pointing west to Chicome Peak in the Jemez Mountains. The song was building like an overfed fire, and Rattlesnake could feel the beads of sweat flying off Coyote. Toa was near exhaustion, but he still had more lyrical stanzas left in his last spin. He was pointing east at Cusempin, Truchas Peak, and the Sangres de Cristo Mountains. As the embers from the Toa fire spread into a half moon on the ground, you could see the physiographic layout of the quaternity of the Rio Grande Rift Valley, known as the Tewa Basin, the Española Basin in the colonial settler world. Thousands of years of erosion created the quaternity era Santa Fe Formation, an alluvial conglomerate on which the Proto-Tewa built many coalition and classic period sites. Schist, gneiss, and granite overlaid by volcanic rock, basalt, rhyolite, and tuff, a result of the valley caldera eruption 500,000 years ago. And as you know, Coyote was there counting coup. But he explained to Rattlesnake how he was there at the War of 1846, Mexican-American War. The lake was taken by the Forest Service, and the Taina could not practice their ceremonies. I had previously taken coup from the Mexicans, but we've been chasing the American settlers till now. Coyote explained how he was by the window taking coup when President Nixon signed the Blue Lake Bill, HR 471, where the US deeded lands to the Taos and Pueblo American Indian tribes. The tribal leaders, Paul Bernal and Cacique Juan de Jesus Romero, signed returning the sacred lands to the Pueblo, December 15, 1970. Rattlesnake squinted his eyes in disbelief, sampled more of the air with its flint black tongue, but Coyote would have none of it. He continued his story as the rainbow trout and the tiger muskie stirred the stillness of the water surface.
Thank you once again, Tez. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for sharing with us. It's been a privilege and an honor to have you here. On a personal level, it is a privilege and an honor for me that our lives have crossed paths, and I look forward to continuing this journey with both of you. And thank you again, Kishwaukee College, the Diversity Committee, for having us. So until next time, please feel free to put your links in the chat if you want people to follow you. And otherwise, thank you. Have a wonderful week.